Hey guys, Biggie here, and welcome to part 3 of our LOD generation guide. And today we're going to be taking a look at DynDOLOD and TexGen. This is the last little piece to get some really great looking LODs. And this one is going to be a lot more informative. The process isn't too hard on paper, but in practice, there's a lot of little things you need to know about DynDOLOD, issues that it can cause, the two kind of current theories of what version of DynDOLOD to use, and I'll go over both of those. But first, what you'll want to do is go ahead and download DynDOLOD. You're going to want, and everything will be linked down below. You'll want DynDOLOD 3 Alpha, you'll want DynDOLOD Resources, and you'll want either you can get DynDOLOD DLL SE, or you can get DynDOLOD DLL NG. I'd personally recommend if you're going to use a DLL, use the DynDOLOD DLL NG because it is more regularly updated. But we'll talk about whether or not those things actually get added. But yeah, when you download DynDOLOD 3 Alpha, this gets you both DynDOLOD and it gets you TexGen. Just make sure to put it in your mod organizer folder /tools. Once you get that extracted, you'll see you'll have DynDOLOD as well as TexGen. When you get these set up, if you're using Root Builder, make sure you did what you did with the xlodgen and just have D, the argument for the stock game folder, and then also add -SSE. I'll include this in the description as well, but this is the argument that you put for setting up both TexGen and DynDOLOD, and also the only thing you check down below here is force load libraries. If you're not using Root Builder or stock game, just still make sure to have SSE so that it uses, well, SSE. And then install DynDOLOD Resources. Now, one thing this is really important to note about DynDOLOD Resources. And this is especially important if you use a mod like Red Bag Solitude or Great City of Solitude, anything that massively overhauls Solitude, is do not check Solitude occlusion planes. This can cause a lot of visual issues if you use those Solitude mods. If you're using vanilla Solitude or just some light add-ons, it's probably okay to choose that. I don't use Whiterun exterior grass. This is honestly, it just makes it so it draws grass in the outside of Whiterun. But it's honestly, for the performance tank, it's not worth it. High Hrothgar window glow, if you want a window glow for High Hrothgar, go check that. DLC Vardenfell 3D plume. I recommend getting this, and especially if you're using something like Rudy's more dramatic plume, sure to have that. And if you want to save on performance, you can get the low-res LOD textures, but textures get generated via TexGen anyway. I choose Desync Birds of Prey, and don't choose Holy Cow. That's basically a meme. And then install DynDOLOD DLL NG if you're going to use it. And both of these you'll want to load really high up in your load order. Pretty much the first things after your gameplay mods, DLL mods, unofficial patch, stuff like that. If you don't load the resources high up, it can cause a lot of visual issues. It's just the only things that should be overriding is just some base game stuff, Creation Club stuff. The Beyond Skyrim stuff is also fine. It pretty much uses the same stuff as the Beyond Skyrim, so if you use Bruma. Now, you might also want to download some higher quality stuff. I'll link some recommended mods below. HD LOD textures, Far Object LOD Improvement Project. These you'll all load right after DynDOLOD resources as well. Ural's additional resources. If you use Fat Skyrim, then you don't need this. It's redundant, but this is also another good one. And basically all these mods just give additional models that end up getting generated from a distance. Now, the first step is going to be TexGen. And a good question I had from last video was Grass Cache. Do you always enable it? Yes. You always, the only output that you ever disable is SSE Terrain Tamriel. You disable that, but Grass Cache is always enabled. No grass in objects. The only time you'll disable no grass in objects is if you use Grass Cache Helper. But if you don't use Grass Cache Helper, always leave that enabled. If you disable Grass Cache, what will happen is your grass will disappear completely. So definitely don't disable that. Now, in another load order thing is if you use Flat Map Framework, this mod will always load after everything else. Otherwise, you'll have issues with purple maps and things like that. So Flat Map Framework, I would, on the left pane, you can keep them enabled when you run your LODs, but on the right pane, disable the ESPs. Because if you don't disable the plugins, what's going to end up happening is DynDOLOD will take this and it'll become a master of DynDOLOD, and then you won't be able to load it before DynDOLOD. So the first thing you need to run is TexGen. And this generates the textures for the 3D objects that you're going to have LODs for. And this step is very simple. Give it a second to load. Now, if this gives you any errors at all, you have to resolve those errors. Like DynDOLOD says, if anything pops up and says that it's missing something or it's the wrong version of something, you need to essentially figure it out. One of the big issues is a wrong version of something. So I'll give you an example. I had the CFTO mod, right? The carriage fast travel overhaul mod. And I thought that I was going crazy when I had errors popping up for the CFTO mod for Winterhold. I had a patch for CFTO for the Great City of Winterhold. Well, what I actually needed was not this version. I actually needed this version, Carriage and Ferry Travel Overhaul Fixes in Winterhold, because this is actually a plugin replacer for CFTO. So if TexGen or DynDOLOD tell you that you have an issue, it's definitely an issue that needs fixing. Otherwise, you might get crashes. If you really can't figure out the issue, then it might just be a mod that you have to remove completely. I don't recommend disabling it, running the LODs, and re-enabling them. So the settings here are going to be pretty standard, although you might have to play around with these a little bit. So if you have Grass Cache enabled, it will automatically detect it and it'll check HD grass for you. Regarding all of these settings, the big one, or the big two, are the grass and the tree settings for light. Now, this is my current setup. If you find that your grass and your trees are really bright or really dark, you can adjust the direct and ambient settings little by little. There's not a great way to do this other than just trial and error, which kind of sucks, but that's what you have to do. And if you trial and error it, unfortunately, you have to rerun both TexGen and DynDOLOD when you do it. You can actually manually choose an output here. I like to keep it outside of my mod list folder. I have my own output folder here. But you can preview these as well. And you can see what something looks like, and you can just tweak the direct or ambient lighting. And this will give you kind of an idea of what it'll look like in game. But yeah, make sure you have stitched object LOD textures, rendered object LOD textures. I don't recommend, regardless of your settings or specs, I don't recommend lowering these at all. 256 size for TexGen. This is pretty standard across the board with all of these settings. There's not really a good reason to do any lower or higher than this. You'll leave HD grass unchecked if you aren't doing grass LODs. And then all of these are going to be set to BC7 quick. Then you just hit start. And what it'll do is in wherever your output was, you'll get a bunch of textures here. And just like you did with the LODgen video, you can go ahead and create an empty mod, call it TexGen or whatever you want, and get this enabled before running DynDOLOD. Now, speaking of DynDOLOD, there is something that you should be aware of for DynDOLOD, and that is DynDOLOD can cause issues. There are two ways to run DynDOLOD. One is with the DLL, and the other is without the DLL. Basically, the difference between the two is running it with the DLL results in better looking LODs. It'll also result in better performance because running it without the DLL enabled essentially runs it through Papyrus scripts. And you also get less LOD flickering because the DLL has large reference workarounds, which is, fancy talk for it prevents Z fighting, so stuff on top of each other and flickering. Now, the big downside to running it with the DLL is it can cause crashes, and I've also had some random freak objects just disappear from me with the DynDOLOD DLL. I'll show you in a second. But I will show you guys how to mitigate these errors. And I'll also show you kind of what I was doing earlier when I was running DynDOLOD, because you never really know when you get errors. But here is an example of a DynDOLOD error that I got. So unresolved form ID, something might be a wrong version. And honestly, these error messages, they're not too hard to debug. You can usually just type in the name of the form ID at the top. Oops, wrong one. 070C9B. And if the form ID doesn't work, go find the mod. So in my case, it was container merges, and it was a container. I'll search by the editor ID. But basically, this was one of these Bruma merchant chests, and just one of these items was showing up as invalid. So I just had to remove one of the items in here or drag something over to fix it. If it's not super evident, then you might just have to get rid of the mod. But the other thing that you can do to prevent a lot of crashes with DynDOLOD, and this will help prevent crashes in general. Now, don't do this for any official plugins. So official plugins you should just fully clean with quick auto cleaner. But anything else, what you'll want to do is there's a really cool Xedit script, and it's super easy. Just highlight the first mod that comes after your official stuff. So in this case, it's just some random little plugin here that comes after the Creation Club stuff. Then find your last plugins. I'm not going to do my synthesis patches, but everything else. And then you can go to Apply Script, and then search Delete. Then you'll see a script here that says Undelete and Disable References. And what this will do is it'll go through your entire plugin and find anything that's deleted, and it'll undelete it and flag it as initially disabled instead of deleted. What this does, for example, is say you have a tree mod, and for whatever reason you didn't want that tree. I don't think there's anything here for me. No, because I did this earlier, there's no changes needed. Let's say there's a tree mod that another mod for whatever reason just completely deletes, and then another mod is trying to reference that tree, the game will crash. So what this does instead is it undeletes them and marks them as initially disabled and throws them under the world. So if they get enabled, they won't actually be there, but the game will at least be able to reference something. So when you do that, you can go ahead and get that saved. The other thing to note is DynDOLOD is going to take a while. It'll take significantly longer than LODs or TexGen. So you'll want to make sure to just kind of check up on it every now and again. But I'll show you the difference between the two versions. So the first way is if you run DynDOLOD without the DLL. It's just you have the resources and any DynDOLOD add-ons that you want other than the resources. You will run DynDOLOD. Same as before, it'll get your plugin list. But there are just a couple differences. And again, if you get any errors, please do not just ignore them or disable the mods and rerun it, because I promise it will cause instabilities. And sometimes DynDOLOD also will force you to get the new version, so keep that in mind. At the top here, you can just select all. If grass cache is enabled, it'll have grass LOD automatically, again, enabled. For the LOD settings themselves, to keep it simple, you can go ahead and check high, medium, or low, depending on your performance needs. High isn't too taxing. Obviously, it looks better. The difference between the versions is mostly what actually gets rendered. So you'll see more things on the high setting compared to the low setting. Now, the big thing that you got to keep in mind, though, is especially if you're using ERM or any sort of other mountain mod. I use Atlantean mountain meshes, so you'll want to make sure to add this new rule here, mask equals mountain. So what you do is you right click on the tree and you go to insert, and it'll pop up with this screen. Under mesh mask reference, type mask equals mountain. Then also make sure to check VWD, visual when distant. LOD levels do 0 for 4, 0 for 8, 1 for 16, and you can also do 1 for 32, or actually 0 for 32, if you don't use flat map framework. So if you use a clear map of Skyrim or just regular Skyrim map, something like that. That's it. The settings here too, tree LOD versus ultra. Basically, if you do tree LOD instead of ultra, your trees will be generated as billboards. So it takes two 2D models of the tree and it kind of intersects them. Whereas ultra trees are going to be 3D tree LODs. Now, if you do use ultra tree, you're going to need to make sure your tree mod is actually compatible. For example, I use Nature of the Wildlands. I think Ulvenwald also has a 3D tree LOD add-on for it. So if you search Ulvenwald 3D, you'll see there's 3D LOD resources. You need these LOD resources. Some tree mods don't support ultra trees at all. So if you try to do ultra and it doesn't support it, you're not even going to see those trees. For the Papyrus scripts version, make sure to check upgrade near grid large references to far grid. Everything else here, glow windows. If you don't want the fake window glow, you can leave that disabled, but I think these look kind of nice. Parent greater than child, child greater than parent high. This essentially determines what sort of stuff you see in child world, so like cities. And make sure to have occlusion data checked quality 3. The difference between the qualities is it'll say right here for most of the stuff when you hover over it, but there's no reason not to have quality 3. Regarding the tile size, I would again leave this all enabled as is. Now the grass LOD density, this one is one that you might fiddle with depending on what type of grass you end up having. If you're, I find 25 to be a good balance between performance and visuals. If you have really patchy grass in the first place, you could probably bump this a little bit lower to maybe 20 or so. If your grass is super dense and the grass LODs end up looking off, you might want to bump this up a little bit higher. I wouldn't go anything beyond 40 for density, and I wouldn't go anything lower than like 15 is even pretty low. I wouldn't really go any lower than 20. And then again, you'll just want to hit, you can save this preset by the way, but then you can just hit OK and it'll generate DynDOLOD for you. And all you'll do at that point is again, go to your output folder, make an empty mod, call it whatever, and then re-enable the outputs. Put the plugins. You'll get 3 plugins actually. The master plugin you can leave at the top where it stays. Then re-enable your flat map framework. Now I'll show you the difference when you run with the DLL. And again, going over the differences between DLL version and the non-DLL version is I've had a substantial stability improvement with the DLL these last few versions, and by undeleting all deleted references. But it can cause just weird freak issues, and they're going to be on an as user, like per user basis. I had one of my water wheels in Riverwood end up disappearing, and I had to actually make a small patch just to bring it back. And I can show you guys in Xedit how to do that. This will, for the most part, be all the same. The difference is now you get a few extra options. Large reference bug workarounds will automatically be enabled as of the last few versions of DynDOLOD DLL. Tree LODs, you can make them large references. That's what I do. This does come at a little bit more of a performance hit, but it's honestly kind of negligible. But you'll want to make sure to still have that mask equals mountain setting here for the mountains. And, you know, everything else will be exactly the same as I showed you last time. Make sure to have these settings: object LOD, ultra large, dynamic LOD. I mean, tree LODs, if you do billboards, honestly, the big hit is your CPU, because there's just so many new objects being generated if you use ultra LODs. So if you have a weaker CPU, I would recommend just doing 2D LODs. They do look nice being 3D, but they're not that noticeable, depending on the region of Skyrim that you're in. Now that is DynDOLOD. I'll just show you guys really quick an example of one of the things that DynDOLOD was making disappear. I'll open up Xedit, and it might be different for you. You guys might not have the issue. You guys might have some other issues, but in general, the big problem I've had with DynDOLOD DLL NG, it still hasn't been resolved. That I don't get with the Papyrus version is just random objects disappearing. Now, Papyrus scripts compared to DLLs, they do use more system resources and hence are heavier. And also, if you get too many Papyrus scripts running at once, your game can just completely freeze. So that's another downside to Papyrus over the DLL, the DynDOLOD DLL version. But it's not too bad of a process unless you get a bunch of errors. And honestly, it's a blessing in disguise though, because some mods might just be problematic, and they're mods that you might not have even known were a big issue. And once you get rid of them, even if you don't use DynDOLOD, your stability and performance will thank you. All right, so here's an example. One of the things it was doing was making the East Empire building in Solitude completely disappear. It was trying to change the model. For whatever reason, DynDOLOD just removed all of the model textures because it was trying to do this has distant LOD flag. And honestly, I can move that over. But the model it was using just didn't have any textures at all, so the building was just not there. With regards to Riverwood, it was turning the entire lumber mill into an X marker and putting it under the ground for whatever reason, and not putting anything in its place. And you know, some of it is just a matter of tracking it down in game, finding the ID, and then just searching the form ID in Xedit. And what I did for this is I just took my last Riverwood mod, and I ended up moving it after DynDOLOD to fix the issue. Anyway, guys, I know this was a lot more of just me discussing DynDOLOD. This is why I made it a 3-part series, because DynDOLOD has a lot of information that you should be aware of. And hopefully this wasn't too big of a rant. Anyway, let me know what other guides you guys would like to see in the future. I will catch you guys next time.